Aetha, the world of Aethelgard, was a jewel in the crown of the segmentum obscurus, a verdant orb swathed in oceans of emerald foliage and crowned by sapphire skies. For millennia, it had been the ancestral home of House Tenebris, a knightly order renowned not for martial aggression, but for its steadfast defense of its few client worlds and its deep, almost spiritual connection to Aethelgard itself. Their towering imperial knights, the lords of the green world, were more than war machines. They were extensions of their pilot souls, their chassis adorned with intricate carvings depicting Aethelgard's flora and fauna, their heraldry depicting a stylized, blossoming tree against a twilight sky. Life on Aethelgard was a symphony of ancient rhythms. The great forests, known as the Sylvanus canopy, breathed out oxygen-rich air that tasted of dew and ancient wood. Crystal rivers snaked through plains of bioluminescent flora, feeding into vast, tranquil lakes. The people of Aethelgard lived in harmony with their environment, their settlements built into the living rock and the colossal boughs of the Sylvanus. They were a proud, introspective folk, guardians of an ancient way of life, their technology reverently maintained and seamlessly integrated into their natural surroundings. The knights of House Tenebris, in turn, were the protectors of this sacred balance, their massive strides leaving only the gentlest impression on the verdant ground, their colossal weapons rarely fired in anger, always in defense. Sir Cailan, the Scion Primus, remembered the scent of the Sylvanus on a spring morning, a crisp, sweet aroma that promised continuation and peace. He remembered the hush of the people as the house's banners passed, a quiet reverence rather than fearful awe. He remembered the silent majesty of the Aethelgard's heart, his personal knight, its adamantium frame gleaming under the twin suns, its every joint a testament to centuries of engineering and devotion. He would often walk the winding paths through the whispering groves, the soft earth yielding under his heavy boots, the vibrant life of his homeworld a constant, reassuring presence. Then came the change. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A slight desaturation in the brilliant greens of the Sylvanus, a faint tremor in the earth that was attributed to tectonic shifts, a chilling silence that sometimes fell upon the normally boisterous fauna. The priests of the green world, the revered ecological stewards of Aethelgard, were the first to voice concern. Their instruments, attuned to the subtle energies of the planet, registered anomalous readings, a slow, draining process, like a colossal, invisible maw, silently drawing sustenance from the world's very core. House Tenebris, accustomed to defending against external threats, initially sought an explanation in the familiar. Xenos incursions? Heretical cults seeking to despoil their sacred world? Scout flights were launched, their knights sweeping across Ethelgard's vast expanses, their sensors keen. But they found nothing. No invading fleet, no hidden cultic enclaves, no telltale signs of sabotage. The threat was ambient, pervasive, emanating from within the planet itself, yet without an identifiable source. The desaturation accelerated. The sapphire skies began to take on a bruised, purplish hue. The vibrant bioluminescence of the flora dimmed, then flickered out, leaving the night with an unnatural, oppressive darkness. The crystal rivers turned sluggish, their waters becoming murky and choked with strange, metallic-looking algae that glowed with an unsettling, dull gray light. Panic, a raw, primal emotion alien to the usually stoic people of Ethelgard, began to spread. Prayers to the Emperor went unanswered, subsumed by a growing dread that permeated the very air. Sir Calen, his face etched with growing concern, gathered his council of veteran knights. "The readings are unprecedented," reported Lady Lyra, his younger sister, and a formidable pilot in her own right, her voice tight with strain. "The planet's geothermal activity is plummeting. Its magnetic field is unraveling. It's as if the world is being bled dry from the inside out." Their scientists, borrowing more advanced Auspex arrays from their Imperial contacts, finally pinpointed the source. A colossal, unidentifiable mass deep within Ethelgard's mantle, radiating an energy signature utterly unlike anything known to Imperial science. It was ancient, cold, and utterly inimical to life. It pulsed with a terrifying rhythm, a silent, cosmic thrum that resonated in the deepest parts of the soul. It was then that the first horrifying theories began to emerge from the astropathic choirs attached to the night house. Fragments of data, half-mad whispers from the warp, spoke of entities from before time, beings of living metal and raw starlight, known only in the most forbidden lore as Catan, star gods. The very name was a curse, a whisper of cosmic horror that chilled the blood. House Tenebris, isolated in their corner of the galaxy, had heard tales of Necrons, ancient Xenos constructs, but the true horror of their masters, the Citan, was largely unknown to them. What was devouring Ethelgard was not a geological anomaly, not a Xenos weapon, but a primal, elemental hunger, a shard, a mere fragment of one of these star gods had lain dormant deep within their sacred world for untold millennia, perhaps crashed there in some forgotten cosmic war. Now, for reasons unknown, it had awakened, and it was feeding. The realization was a physical blow to Sir Kalen and every knight of House Tenebris. Their world, their very reason for being, was being consumed by an entity they could not comprehend, let alone fight. How do you wage war against the silence of a star being eaten from the inside? How do you strike at a foe that is literally devouring the ground beneath your feet? Desperate measures were enacted. Mining operations were retasked, not for resources, but for an impossible assault. Gigantic grav lifts and deep-bore drills designed for millennia of peaceful extraction were hastily converted into weapons platforms, attempting to reach the Citan Shard's location. The knights, normally protectors, became excavators, their chainsords and thermal cannons tearing into the planet's crust, their pilots' hearts heavy with the sacrilege of their actions. But it was futile. Every ton of rock vaporized, every fissure opened, revealed only more of the horrifying, silent energy signature. The shard was too vast, too deeply embedded, too alien to be damaged by conventional means. As they dug, the planet died faster around them. The once lush Sylvanus canopy became a skeletal forest of petrified wood, its leaves crumbling to gray dust. The crystal rivers ran dry, their beds lined with dead, crystalline structures that seemed to hum with the same cold energy as the Citan. The air became thin, metallic, and devoid of the oxygen that had once been Ethelgard's breath. The greatest horror, however, was not the death of the world, but the death of its people. As Ethelgard was consumed, so too were its inhabitants, not through violence, but through a slow, agonizing dissipation. Their strength drained, their minds dulled, their very life force leaching away into the ground, drawn into the insatiable hunger of the Citan Shard. Families huddled together, their skin gray and papery, their eyes vacant, as they slowly, silently faded into nothingness, their bodies becoming mere husks, their souls, presumably, devoured. Sir Kalen watched as his own mother, the venerable Sioness Elysia, wasted away in her bed. Her last breath, a faint sigh that seemed to echo the dying gasp of Ethelgard itself. He stood in the cockpit of the Ethelgard's heart, the familiar controls now cold beneath his gloved hands, watching the readouts of his world's death, feeling the sickening drain within his own spirit. The Imperium, vast and indifferent, offered no succor. Their pleas for aid, initially with polite promises, quickly dissolved into silence. Ethelgard was too remote, too insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and the nature of the threat too bizarre, too improbable for rapid imperial response. Besides, what could even the Imperium do against a Catan shard embedded in a planet's core? The last vestiges of hope died with the Sylvanas. Sir Calin gave the order to prepare the last few functioning transports for an emergency evacuation. It was not a retreat. It was an abandonment. An unthinkable, unforgivable act for a house so deeply entwined with its homeworld. But to remain was to become one with the horror, to be consumed by the silent void. As the few overloaded transport ships lifted off, their engines straining against the planet's failing gravitic field, the dying world presented a final, horrific tableau. Ethelgard, once a vibrant emerald, was now a pallid, gray-white orb, its surface covered in strange, crystalline growths that pulsed with an internal, sickening light. It looked like a vast, rotten fruit, gnawed to its core. Sir Calin, his face a mask of grief and fury, stared out from the command deck of the last transport, the Viridian Tear. Beside him, Lady Lyra wept silently, her face streaked with tears that reflected the cold, alien light of their dying world. Behind them, a handful of surviving night pilots, their armor sullied, their spirits broken, stood vigil. Ethelgard did not explode. It did not collapse into a supernova. Instead, as the Viridian Tear entered the blackness of the void, they watched through their viewports as their world shimmered. The strange, internal light intensified, then pulsed once, violently. And then, as if it had never been, Ethelgard simply winked out, vanished, devoured utterly, leaving behind only an expanding cloud of gray, metallic dust and the terrifying, lingering resonance of an unimaginable hunger. In that horrifying silence, a vow was forged, not in words, but in the raw, primal anguish that tore through Sir Calin's heart. He would find what had done this. He would understand it. And he would, somehow, avenge Ethelgard, even if it meant shattering the galaxy to do it. The initial tremors of change had escalated with a terrifying swiftness. The subtle desaturation, once a whisper, became a scream as the emerald forests of the Sylvanas canopy withered into petrified husks, their colossal boughs twisting into skeletal fingers against a sky that had bled from sapphire to a bruised, unhealthy purple. The very air, once sweet with the scent of pine and rich soil, grew thin and metallic, carrying a chill that seeped into the bones. The ground beneath their feet, once firm and giving, now felt brittle, prone to fracturing into deep, phosphorescent laced fissures that pulsed with a dull gray light emanating from the planet's dying heart. Sir Kalen, his face a mask of grim determination, refused to yield. He pushed his night house to their absolute limits. The Ethelgard's heart, his own cherished machine, along with dozens of other knights, became tools of frantic excavation. No longer defenders, they were forced into a desperate, impossible struggle against the very ground they had sworn to protect. Gigantic thermal lances, meant for cutting through enemy armor, were plunged into the planet's crust, attempting to carve a path to the Satan shard's estimated location. Chainzords, capable of rending plasteel and ceramite, tore at rock and ore, seeking an enemy that had no physical form, only an insatiable hunger. The mining expeditions, led by the most experienced night pilots, descended deeper and deeper into the planet's mantle. Automated drills, usually slow and precise, were forced to operate at unsafe speeds, their teeth grinding against strata that grew increasingly alien. The rock itself seemed to resist, imbued with a strange, passive malevolence. Within these dark, subterranean tunnels, the Satan's presence was palpable. It was not a roar, not a psychic shriek, but an oppressive silence, a cosmic void that devoured sound and light alike. The pilots reported strange sensations, a creeping cold that bypassed their armored suits, visions of endless voids and dying stars, a feeling of their own life force being gently, inexorably drawn away. Some emerged from their machines trembling, their eyes wide with unspoken horrors. Others were simply vacant, their minds fractured by the sheer, overwhelming emptiness they had encountered. Lady Lyra, though young, held the grim distinction of being the first knight to briefly touch the edge of the shard's influence. Her knight, the Viridian Sentinel, had breached a subterranean cavern where the raw power of the Satan was focused. She described it later, her voice hollow, as a perfect silence, a place where all sound, all warmth, all emotion was simply gone. She felt an immense, ancient intelligence, not malevolent in a conventional sense, but utterly indifferent, perceiving her and her world as mere sustenance, a fleeting burst of energy in an otherwise endless, cold void. The experience left her shaken to her core, but it also ignited within her a cold analytical resolve, a determination to understand this horror, even if it cost her everything. Back on the surface, the environmental collapse accelerated beyond any hope of reversal. The ancient, crystalline rivers dried into shimmering scars, their once pure waters now filled with a strange, metallic sludge that pulsed with the same dull gray light that afflicted the ground. The Great Lakes evaporated, leaving behind vast, salt-like flats that gleamed eerily under the dying suns. The once clear atmosphere became choked with dust and fine, silvery motes that seemed to hum with suppressed energy, catching the last rays of the suns and refracting them into sickly, greenish hues. Breathing became a struggle, even for the unarmored, their lungs burning with the toxic air. The people of Æthelgard, known for their quiet resilience, began to break. Fear turned into despair, and despair into a kind of resigned, melancholic stupor. They didn't scream or riot. They simply faded. Their skin grew pale and translucent, their movements slow and listless. Their vital energies, their very will to live, was siphoned away by the entity beneath their feet. Entire families would be found still and quiet, their eyes open but seeing nothing, their bodies reduced to desiccated husks. It was a mass extinction by osmosis, a horror far more insidious than fire or plague. House Tenebris's medics, themselves weakening, could do nothing but offer what comfort they could, watching their charges slowly dissipate. Sir Calin, his command throne in the Æthelgard's heart, had become his prison. He received hourly reports of plummeting geological activity, of atmospheric collapse, of the increasing numbers of fade-outs amongst the populace. His prayers to the emperor, once a source of comfort, now felt like hollow whispers echoing in an empty void. He saw his world dying, felt its life drain away beneath his feet, and yet he could find no enemy to strike, no target for the colossal firepower of his knight. His chainsword hung useless, his thermal lance cooled. How do you fight a cosmic entity that is simply being? The truth dawned upon him with the sickening certainty of a falling anvil. Æthelgard was lost. The Imperium, already stretched thin, would not send aid against such an incomprehensible threat. Even if they did, what could they accomplish? Their weapons were designed for flesh and steel, not for the silent, insatiable hunger of a star god. The decision to evacuate was the hardest he had ever made, a betrayal of everything House Tenebris had stood for. We will gather what few can be saved, Calin announced to his assembled pilots, his voice raw, echoing in the now cavernous, half-lit halls of the Scion's keep. We will take our knights, our honor, and our vengeance. We will leave nothing of House Tenebris here but a curse. His eyes, normally full of a calm strength, burned with a cold, desperate fire. Ethelgard will not die unavenged. The evacuation was chaos, a desperate scramble against a dying world. The few remaining void-capable transport ships, usually reserved for intersystem trade, were hastily prepped. Scavenging parties, comprised of night pilots who had shed their machines for the immediate task, scoured the fading settlements for survivors. But there were so few. Most were too weak to move, too far gone in the Satan's silent embrace. Those who could walk were ushered aboard, gaunt figures wrapped in thin blankets, their eyes reflecting the terror of their dying home. Sir Kalen oversaw the loading of the knights themselves. Each colossal war machine was a testament to Ethelgard's legacy, a piece of its living history. To leave them behind was unthinkable. They were squeezed into cargo bays, their weapon systems powered down, their pilots sitting vigil in their cockpits, their faces drawn and pale. The Viridian Tear, a repurposed bulk hauler that had once carried Ethelgard's exotic flora to distant agri-worlds, became the flagship of their doomed exodus, though it was little more than a battered coffin carrying the remnants of a proud house. As the last transports ascended, buffeted by the planet's rapidly collapsing atmosphere, the view through the observation ports was a nightmare made manifest. Ethelgard, once vibrant, was now a ghostly, luminescent orb. Its surface pulsed with an eerie, sickly gray light, as if the Satan within had begun to manifest its cosmic energies outwards. Strange, crystalline formations, like cancerous growths of black obsidian and gray quartz, erupted from the ground, reaching towards the void, reflecting the last, fading light of the twin suns. The entire world was a monument to its own consumption, a grotesque, silent scream, frozen in space. Sir Kalen stood on the command bridge of the Viridian Tear, his gaze fixed on the dying world. Beside him, Lady Lyra, her face streaked with tears, gripped his arm, her knuckles white. The few remaining retainers and unarmored survivors huddled in the observation lounge, watching their home disappear. They were numb, their grief too vast to comprehend, superseded by a chilling horror. Then, as the Viridian Tear broke clear of the planetary orbit and engaged its sluggish warp drive, Ethelgard performed its final act. It did not explode in a shower of flame. It did not collapse into a black hole. Instead, as if a colossal, unseen hand had simply snuffed out a candle, the entire world shimmered once, an impossibly bright, silent flash of gray-white light that seared itself into the retinas of the observers. And then, Aethelgard was simply gone. No debris, no lingering gases, no gravitational anomaly, just an empty void where a vibrant, living world had once been, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding silence of the cosmos and the horrifying, echoing absence of its existence. It was then, in that moment of profound nothingness, that the vow Kaelin had made solidified into an iron-hard conviction shared by all who remained. Aethelgard had been devoured, its people consumed, its very essence erased. But House Tenebris, or what was left of it, refused to vanish with it. They would become the hunters. They would become the instruments of a vengeance so cold, so relentless, that the very stars would tremble. They would seek out the fragments of the entity that had done this, and they would reassemble them, not to bring their world back, but to harness its power, to turn its own malevolent might against itself, and in doing so, avenge the silent, cosmic murder of Aethelgard. They were broken, adrift, and utterly lost, but they were not defeated. They were reborn, not in glory, but in the grim, shadowed purpose of a terrible quest. The Viridian Tear, a rust bucket made glorious by the precious cargo of grief and vengeance it carried, stumbled through the void. Its engines, designed for sedate interstellar halls, groaned under the strain of continuous warp jumps, pushing the ancient vessel to its very limits. Inside, the surviving members of House Tenebris were a spectral crew, haunted by the echoing silence of Aethelgard's demise. There were perhaps 80 souls left, the core of the Night House, their retainers, a few desperate technicians, and a handful of children, too young to fully comprehend the cosmic horror they had escaped. Their traditional honor, once a guiding beacon, now felt like a relic from a forgotten age. Allegiances to the Imperium, to ancient treaties and oaths of fealty, were shed like dead skin. How could they uphold promises to an empire that had watched their world die? Or worse, ignored their desperate pleas? Their loyalty now belonged solely to Aethelgard, to the phantom limb of a planet that no longer existed. They were renegades, not by choice, but by the devastating necessity of their quest. Sir Kaelin, now Scion Primus of a house without a home, moved with a newfound gravity. The vibrant life that had once sparkled in his eyes was replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. His grief was a furnace that forged his purpose. "We seek not peace nor salvation," he declared in the Viridian Tears cramped command center, addressing the grim faces of his surviving knights. "We seek understanding. We seek fragments. We seek the means to unleash a greater power, to exact a justice that spans the cosmos." Their initial direction was born of desperation, and the fragmented, half-mad whispers that still echoed in the minds of the surviving astropaths, a haunting resonance of the Ceton Shard's departure. These were not coherent messages, but psychic echoes, residual hunger pangs from the entity, vague sensations of cosmic currents, faint trails of energy that hinted at other, similar presences across the galaxy. These, combined with what little forbidden lore they could scrounge from raided archives and intercepted data bursts, formed the foundation of their shadowed pilgrimage. Their journey was a brutal education in the unforgiving realities of the galaxy. Resources were scarce. The Viridian Tier was a constant drain on their dwindling reserves. Fuel, munitions, sustenance, everything had to be acquired through increasingly morally ambiguous means. They became raiders of the void, preying on isolated merchant convoys for their supplies, clashing with minor Imperial Guard patrols and local planetary defense forces who dared to challenge their passage. Each engagement was fought with a chilling efficiency. The House Knights, still wearing their faded Ethelgard livery, becoming specters of vengeance. Their once defensive tactics evolved into aggressive, calculated strikes, their chainswords tearing through foes with a furious precision born of despair. The knights themselves became more than just war machines. They were repositories of their grief, conduits for their rage. Sir Kalen spent hours in the cockpit of the Ethelgard's heart, not in meditation, but in a grim communion with the machine. He felt the phantom chill of the Catan in its controls, the lingering presence of Ethelgard's death in its very adamantium. This was not a healthy bond, but a symbiosis born of trauma. Other pilots reported similar experiences, a growing awareness within their machines, an almost sentient desire for the hunt. Lady Lyra, though still heartbroken by their world's demise, became the house's reluctant scholar. She delved into ancient data slates salvaged from a pre-imperial ruin they had requisitioned, poring over fragmented texts that hinted at the true nature of the Necrons and their star gods. The whispers she had experienced on Ethelgard returned, clearer now, less terrifying, but more insidious. She began to understand the language of cosmic energy, the faint electromagnetic fingerprints that a C'tan shard left in its wake. She developed crude, yet effective, long-range Auspex arrays, jury-rigged onto the Viridian tear, designed to detect the unique, cold energy signatures of dormant C'tan fragments. They are not gods, Kaelin, Lyra told her brother one stark morning, the light from a distant cold star glinting in her eyes. They are devourers, parasites of stars and worlds. They are beings of pure energy, bound by Necron technology. Kaelin listened, but his understanding was filtered through his need for vengeance. Then they are the weapon we shall wield, he countered, his voice flat. If they devour, then they can devour what consumed Ethelgard. If they are bound, then we shall unbind them, or bind them to our will. Lyra argued, we don't understand what we are dealing with. To reassemble one, it would be akin to summoning a demon prince directly into reality, but with cosmic power instead of warp stuff. It would destroy us all. Then let it destroy us all, Kaelin replied, turning away, his gaze fixed on the endless void. So long as Ethelgard is avenged. His resolve was absolute, impervious to reason. The concept of destroying the galaxy was secondary to the burning need for retribution. If the entire cosmos had to burn to sate the hunger of House Tenebris, then so be it. Their quest led them to forgotten corners of the galaxy, to derelict star systems, to ancient, pre-imperial Xenos ruins, and to uncharted asteroid fields. They followed the faintest of psychic echoes, the most minute of energy fluctuations, their fleet, now expanded by a few scavenged frigates and heavily armed gunships, their hulls scarred and bearing the makeshift heraldry of a blossoming tree against a twilight sky, now tainted by the gray of Ethelgard's death, a dark cloud across the stars. The pilgrimage reshaped them. The stoic, noble guardians of Ethelgard became grim, relentless hunters. Their armor, once meticulously maintained, now bore the marks of countless skirmishes, lovingly repaired, but never fully restored. Their once pristine liveries were faded, chipped, and sometimes spattered with the alien gore of Xenos they had fought, or the telltale crimson of Imperial guardsmen who had stood in their way. The pilots, once radiating quiet pride, now carried a brooding intensity, their faces often shaded by the cockpit's interior, their eyes reflecting the cold calculations of strategists rather than the warmth of noble knights. They began to refer to the object of their quest not as a C'tan, but as the god engine of oblivion, a deliberate reinterpretation, a psychological shield against the true horror of what they sought. They convinced themselves that this God engine was a weapon, a tool, something they could control, something they could turn against the rogue shard that had consumed their world. The truth, the horrifying, nihilistic truth of the Satan, was too much to bear without shattering their collective sanity entirely. Their obsession became their identity. The quest for vengeance consumed them, eclipsing all other concerns. Food became fuel, rest a luxury, survival a means to an end. The few children among them, orphaned and hardened, were raised on tales of a lost world and a promised retribution. Their innocence replaced by a nascent fanaticism. The first faint signal, picked up by Lyra's crude Auspex array after months of fruitless searching, was almost missed. A barely there tremor in the cosmic background radiation, a unique energy signature, cold and ancient, emanating from a rogue asteroid belt within a nebula of dying stars. It was not a planetary signature, not a Necron tomb world, but something small, something isolated. Sir Kalen felt a surge of cold triumph. This was it. The first step, the first fragment, the beginning of their horrifying quest. He gave the order, his voice devoid of emotion, yet ringing with absolute conviction. Set course, full speed. Engage, target. The pilgrimage had transformed House Tenebris into something new, something terrible. They were no longer loyal imperial subjects, nor benign protectors. They were the ghost of a dead world, a spectral hand reaching across the void, seeking to grasp a power they did not understand, driven by a vengeance that would ultimately consume them all. The signal was faint, almost imperceptible, a ghost in the vast electromagnetic symphony of the void. Yet, to Lady Lyra's finely tuned, if makeshift, Auspex arrays, it sang a chilling, ancient tune, the unmistakable resonance of a Khitan shard. It emanated from the ghastly shroud, a swirling nebula of cosmic dust and gas that hid a shattered stellar system. Its sun long dead, its planets reduced to scattered asteroid fields. This was a grave for stars, a fitting hunting ground for the remnants of a star god. The Viridian Tear and its small, scavenged flotilla plunged into the ghastly shroud. The nebula's swirling dust and pockets of exotic gases played havoc with their sensors, cloaking the true horror that lay within. Navigation became a perilous dance, the pilots straining at their controls to avoid collision with unseen debris, while Lyra frantically recalibrated her Auspex to pierce the cosmic veil. The environment mirrored the internal state of House Tenebris, fragmented, obscured, and profoundly dangerous. After what felt like an eternity of blind drifting, Lyra's console flared with a definitive lock. "Found it," she rasped, her voice hoarse from days without proper rest. "Signature confirmed. It's concentrated in that asteroid cluster. Sector Gamma 7. Designation, the Maw." Sir Kalen, his face grim, gave the order. "Prepare the knights. This is our first harvest." The asteroid cluster, the Maw, was a chaotic agglomeration of rock and frozen volatiles, riddled with deep fissures and shadowed craters. At its heart lay an asteroid of unnatural density and composition, radiating the cold, ancient energy Lyra had detected. It was a hunk of dead rock, utterly barren, yet humming with a suppressed power that made the very void feel taut around it. The knights of House Tenebris, now grim hunters, were launched. Their hulking forms still bearing the faded and scarred livery of Ethelgard, glided through the asteroid field, their powerful external lights cutting through the nebula's gloom. The airwaves were silent, save for the crackle of Vox static and the heavy breathing of the pilots. Each knight carried specialized excavation tools alongside its formidable arsenal. Grav clamps for securing large sections of rock, heavy-duty thermal lances for precision cutting, and reinforced adamantium claws designed to grip and extract. Sir Kalen, in the Ethelgard's heart, led the vanguard. As they approached the designated asteroid, the Citan's presence grew undeniably stronger. It wasn't a psychic assault, not a mind-shattering scream, but a profound, almost physical, coldness. It permeated the reinforced cockpits, making the night pilots shiver despite their environmental controls. It seeped into their very beings, whispering of cosmic emptiness, of ancient hunger, of a power beyond mortal comprehension. For a moment, the vengeance that had sustained them wavered, replaced by a primal dread. "Stay focused," Kalen barked over the Vox, his own voice betraying a hint of strain. "Remember, Ethelgard, this is how we begin to take it back." They began the arduous process of extraction. The target asteroid, riddled with veins of unknown, inert minerals, resisted their efforts with a stubborn, silent strength. Thermal lances, capable of melting ceramite, struggled to cut through its alien composition. Grav clamps, designed to move entire starship sections, barely shifted the colossal rock. It was as if the asteroid itself was a shell, and the entity within was subtly, passively resisting their intrusion. Hours bled into days. The night pilots worked in shifts, their determination warring with exhaustion. Finally, after a monumental effort, a section of the asteroid cracked, revealing an inner core that defied all known physics. It was a shard of living metal, impossibly black, yet reflecting the dim nebula light with an internal, shifting luminescence. It pulsed with a rhythmic, almost organic thrumming, a beat so slow and vast it seemed to originate from the deepest reaches of cosmic time. This was the Satan fragment. Its form was abstract, almost fluid, like liquid shadow solidified into impossible geometry. It didn't resemble anything organic or technological. It was simply there, a piece of pure, distilled otherness. As the knights carefully began to prise it free, a low, resonant hum emanated from the fragment. It was a sound that existed not in the air, but in the mind, a deep vibration that resonated with the very fabric of reality. The night pilots felt it most acutely. The hum intensified, a silent song of cosmic hunger. It was less a communication and more a raw broadcast of desire. They felt a dizzying surge of energy, a profound sense of power flowing into their machines, mingling with their own life force. Their knights felt stronger, faster, their weapon systems humming with newfound potency. But this power came with a terrifying price. Images flickered through their minds, dying stars, nebulae being siphoned away, entire worlds rendered to dust, all consumed by an unimaginable, indifferent maw. They saw Æthelgard again, but this time from the perspective of the devourer, a brief, delicious spark in an endless, cold night. This psychic resonance, this subtle, insidious influence was terrifying, yet intoxicating. For Kaelin, it was a confirmation. This was the power they needed. This was the vengeance. The Satan shard was not malevolent in a conscious sense. It was a fundamental force of nature, like gravity or entropy, but focused on consumption. If they could direct that force, bind it to their will, then Æthelgard would have its justice. Lyra, however, felt a deeper unease. The hum, to her, was not a promise of power, but a lullaby of annihilation. She saw the images, but also felt the utter emptiness behind them, the profound lack of empathy or consciousness beyond the basic drive to consume. She watched her brother, his face set in a grim mask of triumph, and saw the subtle shift in his aura, the deepening shadow in his eyes. The fragment was not just a tool, it was a contagion. The shard was eventually secured within a purpose-built containment chamber in the Viridian Tyr's deepest cargo bay. It was a cube of dark, metallic alloys, intricately woven with electromag barriers and psychic wards salvaged from ancient Necron texts. Even contained, its presence was undeniable. The air around the chamber felt unnaturally cold, heavy, with a silent pressure. The Viridian Tears engines ran with an unexpected efficiency, almost as if the fragment itself was subtly powering the ship, drawing on the vessel's very structural integrity as fuel. The pilots emerged from their nights exhausted but exhilarated. They had faced cosmic horror and emerged victorious. The power they had felt, though unsettling, was a taste of what they sought. It was a validation of their desperate quest. They had brought the ghost of Ethelgard closer to its revenge. As the Viridian Tear exited the ghastly shroud, its internal systems humming with an unholy efficiency, Sir Kalen stood before the containment chamber. The black, impossibly geometric shard pulsed faintly within. A captive star-eater. "The first piece," he whispered, his voice resonating with a grim satisfaction. "Soon, the others will follow. Soon, the god engine of oblivion will awaken, and Ethelgard will have its justice." But as he stared at the captive fragment, a subtle shift occurred in the light. The blossoming tree of House Tenebris, emblazoned on the wall nearby, seemed to dim, its vibrant greens fading slightly, replaced by an almost imperceptible pallor. The silent hunger within the chamber was already at work, subtly, insidiously, beginning its true consumption. The success of the first extraction, though achieved at great cost and under immense psychological strain, solidified Sir Kalen's resolve. The captive Satan shard, humming with its ancient, silent hunger in the Viridian Tear's depths, became their dark totem, a constant reminder of their objective and the power they now wielded, however precariously. The subtle energy drain it exerted was overlooked, even embraced, as a necessary byproduct of wielding such cosmic might. The nature of their quest, however, began to twist them further from their noble origins. The galaxy, unforgiving and vast, did not readily offer up its forbidden treasures. Citan fragments, even dormant ones, were often hidden deep within protected enclaves, guarded by ancient Xenos wards, zealous cults, or, most frequently, the Adeptus Mechanicus, who coveted such relics for their own inscrutable purposes. Their new methods were born of necessity and desperation. House Tenebris became a predatory force, their scavenged fleet, now bearing the ominous moniker the Morning Fleet, striking with swift, brutal efficiency. Their targets were no longer mere merchant vessels. They became adept at deciphering cryptic ancient texts and sifting through intercepted communications, seeking out mentions of living metal, star glass, or sentient energy anomalies. These clues, however vague, led them to places where dormant shards might be hidden. Their first major confrontation after the Maw was with a minor Adeptus Mechanicus forge world, designation Stygia Secundus. The tech priests there had unwittingly unearthed a small Citan fragment during deep strata mining operations, believing it to be a unique form of omniscient alloy. They had contained it within an elaborate stasis field array, intending to study its anomalous properties. House Tenebris struck with the cold precision of seasoned raiders. Their knights, emerging from the warp in a terrifyingly coordinated assault, tore through the planetary defenses. The battle was a brutal, one-sided affair. Imperial knight doctrines of honor and chivalry were abandoned. They struck at power generators, vital conduits, and communication arrays first, crippling Stygia Secundus before it could properly rally. Sir Kalen, in the Aethelgard's heart, carved a path through Skitarii legions and heavily armored Castellan cohorts. His knight, now subtly enhanced by the lingering psychic resonance of the captive shard, moved with an almost unnatural grace, its weapons striking with unprecedented force. The other pilots, too, felt this sinister boost. Their shots landed with greater accuracy. Their shields pulsed with enhanced energy. Their chainswords bit deeper. But this came at a cost. The whispered images of cosmic hunger grew clearer in their minds, subtly shifting their perception, blurring the lines between their vengeance and the Citan's inherent drive to consume. The lives they took, the destruction they wrought, became less about strategy and more about the satisfaction of unleashing power. Lady Lyra, observing from the Viridian Tears command bridge, felt a growing dread. She watched her fellow knights, once noble defenders, now engage in acts of calculated brutality that bordered on atrocity. They were no longer simply fighting. They were boiling. "Kalen," she vowed, her voice tight with horror, as she watched a night Viridian vigil systematically dismember a group of fleeing tech priests. "What are we doing? This is not us. This is not for Aethelgard. This is what is necessary, Lyra," Kalen responded, his voice flat, devoid of his usual brotherly warmth. "These scientists would keep our vengeance locked away. They would squander the power that could save us. They are a means to an end." The subtle, insidious influence of the Citan shard was clearly at work, twisting his perspective, rationalizing every atrocity as a step towards their ultimate goal. The second shard was extracted from Stygia Secundus with brutal efficiency. It was smaller than the first, a delicate, almost skeletal piece of living metal that hummed with a higher, more frantic frequency. As it was brought aboard the Viridian tier and placed in an adjacent containment chamber, its influence was immediate and unsettling. The ship's internal systems, already subtly affected by the first fragment, now suffered erratic power surges and unpredictable grav fluctuations. The air grew colder, and a faint, acrid scent, like ozone mixed with ancient dust, permeated the vessel. More disturbingly, the night pilots who had participated in the Stygia Secundus raid began to change. Their sleep was restless, plagued by visions of cosmic annihilation. They grew withdrawn, their conversations terse, their eyes holding a distant, unsettling gleam. Their connection to their knights deepened, but it was a darker bond now, less about tradition and more about raw, unbridled power. They spoke of the God Engine's blessings, of the cold logic of vengeance, dismissing Lyra's growing concerns as weakness. The internal corruption was not physical, not yet. It was a gradual erosion of their humanity, a slow replacement of their empathy with the Citan's chilling indifference. They became more efficient, more ruthless, better at their grim task, but less human with every step. Their next acquisition took them to a feral world, Ignis Prime, where a primitive, fire-worshipping cult venerated a meteorite of star iron that pulsed with a faint, internal light. It was, of course, another Titan fragment. The cultists, though technologically primitive, were fanatically devoted to their fire god, sacrificing their own children into its smoldering maw. House Tenebris annihilated them. There was no negotiation, no attempt at understanding, just overwhelming force. The knights, glowing faintly with the energies of the captured shards, descended like avenging angels of a grim, mechanical god. The battle was short, brutal, and horrifyingly one-sided. The screams of the cultists were drowned out by the roar of thermal cannons and the thunder of adamantium feet. As the third shard, a grotesque crystalline entity that hummed with a searing heat, was secured, the Viridian tier itself seemed to shudder. The internal temperature dropped precipitously in some sections, while others became unbearably hot. Systems flickered, and the constant low hum of the combined shards filled the ship. A discordant symphony of cosmic power. Lady Lyra watched her brother, once a paragon of honor, descend deeper into this abyss of vengeance. He had become a stranger, driven by an unholy obsession. He rationalized every atrocity, every loss of life, every act of moral compromise as a necessary sacrifice for Ethelgard. But Lyra knew that Ethelgard, the true Ethelgard, would have wept at the sight of what they had become. The seeds of internal corruption had not merely sprouted. They had taken root, coiling around the hearts and minds of House Tenebris. The promise of the God engine of oblivion had become a dangerous intoxicant, masking the true, insidious nature of the power they accumulated. They were becoming less like the avengers of a lost world, and more like instruments of the very horror they sought to control. And out in the vast, indifferent galaxy, their bloody trail was beginning to attract unwanted attention. The galaxy, vast and uncaring as it was, still possessed mechanisms of self-preservation, however slow and grinding their gears. The trail of despoiled forge worlds, annihilated cults, and scattered imperial vessels left by House Tenebris, or the Mourning Fleet, as they were increasingly known, did not go unnoticed forever. Fragments of information, distorted and often dismissed as local heresy, eventually coalesced on the data slates of the Ordo Xenos. His name was Valerius, Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos. He was a gaunt, severe man, his face a landscape of deep-set lines etched by years of grim duty. His right eye was a sophisticated augmetic, its lens whirring almost imperceptibly as it processed information at speeds that would shatter a lesser mind. Unlike many of his more zealous brethren, Valerius was a pragmatist, a master of deduction and calculated risk. He did not chase whispers of demons or hunt down minor cults unless they posed a quantifiable threat to imperial stability. When the first reports of a renegade knight house started crossing his desk, Valerius was initially dismissive. Such things were not unheard of, often ending quickly in a hail of imperial artillery or a righteous purge by a Space Marine chapter. But the details were unsettling. A defunct forge world, its Skitarii legions mysteriously ineffective against a small, highly mobile force of knights. A feral world cult, eradicated with an almost surgical precision, yet leaving behind widespread environmental devastation. The bizarre energy signatures detected by imperial astropaths in the wake of these attacks, whispers of cold fire and silent voids. Valerius began to dig deeper. He requisitioned all available data, activating his network of informants and agents across several segmenta. He uncovered the fate of Ethelgard, a planet that had simply winked out of existence, a classified incident attributed to an unknown Xenos weapon. He connected the fragmented psychic echoes from the defunct astropathic choirs to forbidden lore, texts that spoke of the Titan, the star gods, and their dreadful appetite. The puzzle pieces began to slot together, forming a picture of cosmic horror and terrifying desperation. A night house, their homeworld devoured by a Citan shard, Valerius murmured to his acolyte, a stoic woman named Ilara, as he stared at a holographic projection of Ethelgard's former orbital coordinates, now a blank void. And now they hunt for other fragments. To what end, I wonder? Vengeance, Lord Inquisitor, Ilara replied, consulting her data slate. Their original pleas for imperial aid were comprehensive. They described the C'tan's influence in horrifying detail. To them, this reassembly might be a righteous act, a tool to strike back. Valerius scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. Vengeance is a fool's motive when dealing with entities that devour stars. They believe they are gathering tools. They are, in fact, gathering the pieces of a universe-shattering catastrophe. He tapped a finger against the holographic image of the first Citan shard discovered by House Tenebris, now categorized as Anomaly 7 Sigma. They do not understand what they court. An assembled Citan is not a weapon to be wielded. It is an apex predator, a force of annihilation that would make the eye of terror seem like a flickering candle. From that moment, Valerius dedicated himself entirely to the eradication of House Tenebris. This was not a punitive action against renegades. It was a desperate race against cosmic Armageddon. He understood that if House Tenebris succeeded in reassembling even a partial Citan, the consequences would be unimaginable, possibly leading to the consumption of entire star systems, perhaps even igniting a second war in heaven. His strategy was meticulous, devoid of grand gestures or overt declarations of war. He moved in the shadows, his authority silently exerted over local imperial governors, rogue traders, and even some elements of the Adeptus Astartes chapters, though he kept the true nature of the threat carefully veiled, hinting only at extremely dangerous Xenos artifacts and corrupted imperial assets. He began to lay a trap, a slow, tightening net across the vastness of the segmentum obscurus. He started by cutting off their supply lines. Unbeknownst to House Tenebris, the merchant convoys they once raided found themselves diverted, their routes subtly altered by imperial decree. Isolated outposts they might once have plundered suddenly found themselves reinforced, their defenses inexplicably upgraded. The bounty on their heads, initially small, swelled to an astronomical sum, enough to tempt even the most jaded mercenary fleets. Valerius also used their own methods against them. He began to seed misinformation, to alter ancient Xenos data slates recovered from derelict ruins, subtly directing House Tenebris away from benign or well-guarded fragments and towards locations where Imperial forces could be positioned for an ambush. He played on their desperation, their single-minded pursuit, leading them down increasingly dangerous paths. He established clandestine listening posts along their predicted trajectory, employing highly sensitive grav sensors and psychic echo detectors, specifically calibrated to the unique energy signatures of Citan fragments. He learned their fleet's composition, their preferred jump points, their tactics. He studied Sir Kaelin's known battle strategies, Lady Lyra's emerging expertise in Citan detection. He profiled every pilot, every crew member. His network grew to encompass a small, hand-picked task force, a detachment of veteran Imperial Navy frigates, their commanders sworn to absolute secrecy, a unit of skilled Ordo Xenos operatives, fluent in ancient Xenos languages and equipped with exotic weaponry, and most crucially, a cadre of Grey Knights held in reserve, their existence known only to Valerius and the highest echelons of the Ordo Malleus, ready to be unleashed only when the true nature of the threat became undeniable. The Grey Knights, ever vigilant against warp incursions, were the ultimate fail-safe, the Emperor's instrument of utter annihilation for threats beyond mortal ken. They are accumulating power, Inquisitor, Ilara reported one cycle, pointing to a series of data logs detailing the increased energy output emanating from the Viridian tear. The Citan fragments are resonating with each other, growing stronger, even in dormancy. Their internal energy signature is escalating exponentially. Valerius's augmented eye whirred, zooming in on the energy spikes. They grow in strength, yes, but also in arrogance. They believe they are masters of this power. They are merely conduits, accelerating their own doom, and potentially ours. He turned from the data, his gaze fixed on the star charts spread across his desk. The net is almost complete. We need to drive them towards a suitable stage, a place where the inevitable cataclysm can be contained, or at least mitigated. The hunt had begun. Not just House Tenebris's desperate quest for vengeance, but Inquisitor Valerius's silent, relentless pursuit to stop them, to prevent a tragedy of galactic proportions. The two forces, both driven by an unwavering conviction, were now on a collision course, their paths converging towards an unknown, apocalyptic endpoint. The shadow of the Inquisition had fallen, unseen, upon House Tenebris, and Valerius intended for it to be the last shadow they ever knew. The path House Tenebris trod was paved with the fading echoes of their noble past and the rising crescendo of cosmic hunger. Each acquired Catan fragment, each brutal skirmish fought, left an indelible mark upon the night pilots, etching deeper lines of grim determination, but also subtly eroding their humanity. The subtle psychic resonance, once a whisper, grew into a constant hum within their minds, a song of boundless power and chilling indifference. Their next acquisition was particularly brutal, a Pyrrhic victory that cemented their transformation. Intelligence, painstakingly gathered by Lady Lyra from salvaged Necron data slates, pointed to a Citan fragment hidden within the deepest crypts of a forgotten Necron tomb world, designated Xylos Prime. This was no mere asteroid. This was a fortress world of living metal, its ancient masters slumbering, but ready to awaken at the slightest provocation. Sir Kalen, his face now habitually set in a stern, unyielding mask, recognized the immense risk. "This is not a raid. This is a siege," he declared to his assembled pilots, his voice flat, devoid of the customary rallying cries of a knight commander. "We will shatter Xylos Prime and take what is ours. Ethelgard demands it." The assault on Xylos Prime was unlike any they had undertaken. The Necron defenses were formidable, Gauss flayers that stripped ceramite from their knights' armor, legions of Necron warriors that rose endlessly from the dust, and towering monoliths that projected searing energy beams. The Morning Fleet, though expanded, was still a fraction of what would be required for a full-scale assault on a tomb world. They relied on speed, shock tactics, and the insidious, growing power of their captured Citan shards. The knights descended like vengeful phantoms, their engines wailing, their weapons spitting fire. The constant hum of the captive Citan fragments within the Viridian tear resonated through their machines, enhancing their strength, dulling their pain, and amplifying their aggression. Pilot after pilot reported a chilling detachment from the carnage, a sense of being an instrument of raw, cosmic power, rather than a sentient being fighting for a cause. Their shots found targets with uncanny precision. Their shields absorbed blows that should have buckled adamantium, and their chainzords tore through living metal with unnatural ease. Sir Kalen, at the spearhead of the assault, fought with a terrifying ferocity. The Ethelgard's heart became a whirlwind of destruction, its thermal lance carving swaths through Necron phalanxes, its chainsword a blur of tearing metal. But even Kalen felt the subtle corruption. The Necrons, once formidable foes, began to appear as mere obstacles, their resistance merely an irritation. The death and destruction he wrought felt less like a necessary evil and more like a satisfying release of the power building within him, the power of the nascent God engine. The core objective was a deep obsidian pyramid, radiating the desired Satan signature. To reach it, the knights had to fight through layers of Necron guardians, each more ancient and deadly than the last. They encountered scarab swarms that devoured their armor, energy-wreathed immortals that seemed impervious to their firepower, and even a slumbering cryptek, its esoteric weapons nearly incinerating 3 knights before it was finally brought down in a desperate last-ditch assault by Lady Lyra. Lyra, in the Viridian Sentinel, fought with a cold, almost surgical precision. She observed the effects of the shards on her comrades, the blank stares, the escalating ruthlessness, the almost inhuman efficiency. She felt it herself, a pervasive chill in her mind, a temptation to let the silent hum guide her every action, to embrace the terrifying power and shed the burdensome emotions of grief and doubt. But she resisted, clinging fiercely to the fading memories of Ethelgard, to the faces of her family, to the warmth of her world. She understood now that this power was not a blessing, but a parasitic curse. The pyramid's defenses were eventually breached, but at a horrifying cost. 3 knights, including the Viridian Vigil, which had been so quick to atrocities on Stygia Secundus, were utterly destroyed, their pilots consumed by Gauss fire or torn apart by reanimating Necron blades. Several more were heavily damaged, their pilots barely escaping with their lives, their minds scarred by the traumatic interface with the Satan's ambient power and the relentless Necron assault. The prize, however, was immense. Deep within the pyramid, radiating a field of sheer, oppressive nihilism, lay a large, crystalline Satan fragment, its form resembling a stylized, skeletal hand grasping at empty space. It pulsed with a profound sense of ancientness, a cosmic exhaustion that was almost more terrifying than active malevolence. This was the largest fragment they had acquired yet, a significant piece of the God engine. Extraction was a nightmarish ordeal. The Necron tomb world, now fully roused, fought back with renewed fury. Scarabs swarmed the exposed fragment, attempting to reclaim it. Warriors poured from every opening, their Gauss flares spitting green death. The knights, battered and bruised, held a desperate perimeter around the fragment as a specialized salvage team worked frantically to secure it. As the crystalline shard was lifted, secured in a grav containment field, a chilling psychic scream tore through the minds of every living being on Xylos Prime, and with it the Viridian Terror. in orbit. It was not a cry of pain or anger, but a chromic rage, a silent roar of ancient power disturbed. The Necron host, animated by this primal outburst, redoubled their assault, their movements becoming frenzied and unthinking. House Tenebris, battered but victorious, barely escaped Xylos Prime. Their fleet limped back into the void, shedding damaged vessels and leaving behind a devastated tomb world that would take centuries to fully reawaken. The crystalline shard, once aboard the Viridian Tear and placed next to the others, caused an immediate and profound shift. The combined hum of the Cetan fragments now filled the entire ship, a pervasive, chilling presence that seeped into every bulkhead, every thought. Power fluctuations became constant, internal systems failing and rerouting erratically. The air grew colder, heavier, saturated with a strange, metallic tang. The very shadows seemed to deepen, taking on an almost hungry quality. The night pilots, those who had survived, were irrevocably changed. Their eyes, once reflecting the light of Aethelgard, now held the cold, calculating glint of alien entities. Their connection to their machines had become almost complete, their humanity further eroded. They rarely spoke of home now, only of the great work, of the God engine, of the final vengeance. Their minds, subtly warped, embraced the Cetan's indifference, seeing all life as fleeting, all worlds as mere resources. Sir Kalen stood before the containment chamber, gazing at the skeletal hand fragment. It pulsed with a slow, ancient rhythm, a silent promise of ultimate power. He had lost 3 knights, irreplaceable comrades, and pushed his house to the brink of ruin. All for this. The cost was immense, the victory Pyrrhic. But in his mind, it was a necessary sacrifice. Aethelgard, he believed, was closer to its retribution. He did not notice the deepening shadows that now clung to his own features, nor the cold, alien gleam in his eyes that mirrored the C'tan's own. He was becoming an extension of the hunger he sought to control, a puppet on strings of cosmic indifference. The price of their victory was not just lives and ships. It was their very souls. The escalating power of the coalescing Cetan fragments brought with it not only enhanced strength for House Tenebris, but also a terrifying clarity regarding the entities they now pursued. Lady Lyra, plagued by nightmares and increasingly isolated by her brother's fanatical zeal, found herself drawn deeper into the forbidden lore she had begun to uncover. The Cetan fragments, though dormant, resonated with an increasing clarity, broadcasting their ancient truths into the minds of the discerning. Her research led her to ancient Xenos data slates recovered from the desolate reaches of Xylos Prime, as well as fragmented imperial archives that whispered of cosmic cataclysms from ages long past. These texts, pieced together with an almost feverish intensity, painted a picture far more horrific than her previous understanding. The Satan were not merely devourers, as she had initially surmised. They were fundamental forces of the universe, beings of pure energy and thought, who had once held sway over the entire cosmos. They were the Old One's great mistake, the Necron's monstrous masters. Lyra learned of the war in heaven, a conflict of unimaginable scale that reshaped the galaxy. She read of the Satan's betrayal of the Necronter, binding them into living metal bodies and then feasting upon their very souls. She saw visions of entire star systems drained of life, of nebula siphoned away, of civilizations extinguished in silent, cosmic feeding frenzies. The god engine of oblivion that Kaelin so desperately sought was not a weapon to be wielded. It was the ultimate expression of cosmic hunger, a being of such profound malevolence and power that its awakening would mean the end of all life, all consciousness, in an entire swath of the galaxy. One chilling discovery solidified her dread. An ancient Necron data tablet, miraculously still functioning, contained a single, terrifying excerpt. And the shard of the endless hunger, broken from its greater form in the final betrayal, was cast into the depths of a green world, there to slumber, its craving unfulfilled. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The shard of the endless hunger, a green world, Ethelgard. The entity that had devoured their homeworld was not a rogue element, not a random anomaly. It was a known fragment, a piece of a greater horror, explicitly named in ancient Necron records. House Tenebris was not seeking to avenge Ethelgard by harnessing an unknown power. They were seeking to reconstitute the very entity that had consumed it. They were gathering the scattered limbs of their destroyer, preparing to grant it renewed sentience and boundless power, utterly oblivious to the true implications. Lyra's mind reeled. The irony was a bitter poison. They were not fighting for Ethelgard. They were becoming its unwitting executioners on a galactic scale. Their vengeance was a self-fulfilling prophecy of cosmic annihilation. She confronted Kaelin in the Viridian Tears command center, the hum of the captive Satan fragments, a constant, chilling presence in the background. She presented him with the data slates, the ancient texts, the terrifying revelations. Kaelin, you must see this. We are wrong. This God engine is not a tool. It is the architect of Ethelgard's demise. the very thing that consumed our world. If we reassemble it, we will unleash absolute horror upon the galaxy, and Ethelgard's memory will be tainted by the ultimate atrocity. Sir Calin listened, his eyes cold, devoid of the brotherly affection she remembered. He skimmed the ancient texts, his augmetic implant whirring. The images of dying stars, the cosmic hunger, these were no longer warnings to him, but visions of supreme power. The Satan's influence, subtle but pervasive, had already twisted his perception beyond redemption. Propaganda, he dismissed, his voice flat. Ancient Xenos lies, designed to scare lesser beings from true power. Or perhaps a misinterpretation of a primitive species. These star gods are merely beings of immense energy, Lyra. Raw power. Power that we can harness. He pointed to the contained Satan fragments, glowing faintly in their chambers. Do you not feel it? The strength, the potential, this is the justice Ethelgard deserves. To turn its own destroyers, might against itself. It's not a weapon, Calin. It's a primal force of destruction. You are becoming like it, Lyra pleaded, her voice cracking with despair. Don't you see how it has changed us? How it has corrupted our honor, warped our purpose? Look at our knights. They are barely human anymore. Calin turned, his gaze distant, his face a chilling mask. Humanity is weakness, Lyra. Honor is a luxury for those who still have worlds to protect. We lost our world. We have only vengeance left. And this God engine is the means to achieve it. Your doubts are merely the last vestiges of sentimentality, a burden we cannot afford. He walked towards her, his presence now radiating an almost palpable coldness, an echo of the shards in the ship's hold. You speak of true horror, sister. The true horror was watching Ethelgard die, knowing we were powerless. The true horror is inaction. This is not corruption, Lyra. This is evolution. This is necessity. If you cannot see that, then you are a liability to the great work. His words struck her harder than any blow. Her own brother, the man who had taught her to pilot her first knight, the stoic defender of Ethelgard, was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fanatic, his mind consumed by the very entities he believed he commanded. She saw then, with devastating clarity, that he was too far gone. The Satan's insidious influence, flowing from the dormant fragments, had irrevocably warped his mind, twisting his grief and desire for vengeance into a pathological obsession with absolute power. Lyra retreated, her heart heavy with despair. Her attempts to reason with Kaelin were futile. He had embraced the nihilism of the Catan, rationalizing it as a higher purpose. He had sacrificed his humanity on the altar of a monstrous vengeance and dragged House Tenebris with him. The dark legacy of Ethelgard was no longer about remembrance or justice. It was about the horrific potential of a galaxy-shattering rebirth. And Lyra now understood that she stood alone against the very people she loved, against the terrible path they had chosen, and against the cosmic horror they were unwittingly summoning. The whispers of true horror had finally been understood, and they spoke of a doom far greater than the loss of one world. The grim harvest continued. House Tenebris, now less a nightly order and more a desperate, itinerant cult, ranged ever wider across the galaxy. Their course increasingly erratic as they followed Lyra's refined yet ominous Citan detection protocols. The Viridian tier and its motley collection of scavenged vessels, now further augmented by a captured Imperial frigate and several heavily armed gun cutters, was a silent, ominous presence in the void, its internal hum a constant, chilling reminder of its terrible cargo. Their targets became increasingly diverse, their methods increasingly brutal. They raided a forgotten Necronter-stellar cartography station, its databanks yielding fragmented star charts that hinted at ancient Citan crash sites. They clashed with a reclusive Adeptus Mechanicus explorator fleet, who guarded a metallic deity that pulsed with the unmistakable cold energy of a Citan fragment. They even found themselves battling a minor Xenos empire, the Cathar, whose entire culture revolved around the veneration of a star stone that hung in their capital world's sky. A small, shimmering shard of living metal. Each acquisition of a Catan fragment further amplified the power and the corruption within House Tenebris. The Viridian tear itself groaned under the strain, its internal systems a chaotic symphony of power surges and grave fluctuations. The air grew not only colder, but also thinner, metallic, and strangely charged, making normal breathing difficult for those not encased in power armor. Psychic phenomena became more common. Minor astropathic choirs often succumbed to seizures, babbling incoherent prophecies of cosmic emptiness and endless hunger, or simply falling silent, their minds consumed. The knights, however, thrived. Their machines, subtly infused with the energies of the coalescing shards, became instruments of terrifying potency. Their armor, once bearing the vibrant heraldry of Aethelgard, was now faded, scarred, and often partially transmuted, shimmering with an unholy internal light. Weapons, once fueled by plasma and melta, seemed to draw on a deeper, colder energy, their shots hitting with greater force, their beam weapons searing with an unearthly intensity. The pilots, encased within, felt a growing communion with their machines, a terrifying melding of flesh and living metal, their thoughts and the Citan's ambient hunger becoming intertwined. Sir Calin, now utterly consumed by his obsession, led every major engagement. His tactics, once methodical and honor-bound, became brutally efficient, often involving overwhelming initial assaults designed to shatter enemy morale and defenses. He did not hesitate to sacrifice ships or pilots if it meant securing a fragment. The lives of his remaining people were merely resources in the grand equation of vengeance. He spoke less and less of Aethelgard itself, and more of the great work, the God engine, the inevitable judgment. Lady Lyra watched with a heavy heart. She saw the transformation of her comrades, the coldness in their eyes, the brutal efficiency in their actions. They were no longer the proud knights of Aethelgard. They were something else, something terrifyingly close to the silent, unfeeling entities they hunted. She still played her part, guiding the morning fleet to new fragments, for to abandon them now would be to ensure the cataclysm. Her hope was to find a countermeasure, a weakness, anything that could halt the horrific course they were on, even if it meant sacrificing herself. Their latest target, an isolated moonlet within a desolate star system, promised a substantial fragment. Lyra's sensors detected an unusual confluence of energies, a localized anomaly that suggested not just a dormant shard, but perhaps something more, a Nexus core artifact, a device of Necron origin designed to aid in the manipulation or binding of Citan energies. Its acquisition would be a critical step for Caelin's great work, enabling the more efficient and potentially catastrophic merging of the fragments. The moonlet, designated Xylos Minor, was home to a secluded imperial cult, the Brotherhood of the Silent Star. They were a small, secretive sect, their beliefs a strange mix of imperial reverence and archaic star worship. They had discovered the Nexus core, and misunderstanding its true nature, revered it as a blessed relic, building a monolithic temple around it, believing it to be a conduit to the Emperor's divine light. House Tenebris, now devoid of all restraint, descended upon Xylos Minor like a plague. The cultists, armed with ancient Las rifles and fervent belief, were no match for the knights. The battle was a massacre, a brutal, one-sided affair. Sir Calin, in the Ethelgard's heart, personally shattered the temple's outer defenses, his knight bathed in the raw, cold energies emanating from the coalescing shards. The cultists, screaming prayers to a silent emperor, were mown down by thermal blasts and pulverized under adamantium feet. Lyra, watching from her knight, the Viridian sentinel, felt a surge of nausea. She saw one of the younger knight pilots, barely out of training before Ethelgard's fall, systematically executing wounded cultists, his movements precise and utterly devoid of mercy. He was no longer the frightened boy she remembered. He was an empty vessel, driven by the cold hunger. This was not the legacy of Ethelgard. This was blasphemy. The Nexus core was indeed within the temple's depths, a shimmering, geometric construct of living metal, pulsating with controlled energy. It was a marvel of Necron engineering, and precisely what Calin needed. As it was brought aboard the Viridian Tear, its energies immediately began to interact with the captive Citan fragments. The ship hummed with a terrifying new intensity, the individual resonances of the shards beginning to harmonize into a singular, deeper thrum. The internal lights of the ship flared, then dimmed, then pulsed in unsettling rhythm with the core. With the Nexus core, Calin believed they had the key. The final pieces of the God engine could now be drawn together, their individual wills subservient to the binding power of the ancient artifact. He stood before the containment chambers, the shimmering core at his side, and felt a surge of cold triumph. His vengeance was almost complete. But Lyra knew otherwise. The Nexus core was not a tool for controlling the Citan. It was a device for assembling them. It would not make them subservient. It would simply make them whole. And a whole Citan, even a fractured one, was an entity of such cosmic horror that even the Necrons had been forced to shatter them. This glimmer of hope was merely a deeper descent into madness, a catastrophic step closer to unleashing the very apocalypse they sought to control. With the acquisition of the Nexus core, House Tenebris, now irrevocably transformed into the Morning Fleet, embarked on the final, most desperate phase of their quest. The fleet, a motley collection of salvaged vessels, their hulls scarred and bearing the hastily painted, corrupted heraldry of a dying world, felt less like a naval force and more like a collection of desperate scavengers, their every movement driven by a singular, all-consuming obsession. The Viridian Tear, at its heart, was a vessel of growing cosmic horror, its internal atmosphere heavy with the cold, silent hum of the coalescing Citan fragments. Their targets were now specific and deeply buried. Lyra, her mind a maelstrom of dread and cold logic, pinpointed the last known locations of significant Citan fragments. These were not minor shards hidden in asteroids, but larger, more potent pieces, often entombed deep within ancient necron structures or long-forgotten planetary cores, their presence cloaked by millennia of dormancy and potent psychic wards. The Long War had truly begun, a series of brutal, galaxy-spanning campaigns that stretched the Morning Fleet to its breaking point. Each engagement was more savage, each victory more costly. They clashed with Necron legions, defending their slumbering masters, their battles echoing the ancient war in heaven in miniature. They fought against zealous imperial factions who stumbled upon these forbidden sites, ignorant of the true horror they protected. They even found themselves battling lesser Xenos species, who, by sheer cosmic coincidence, had built their civilizations around the very fragments House Tenebris now sought. The knights of House Tenebris were no longer recognizable as the noble guardians of Aethelgard. Their war machines, once symbols of honor and protection, were now conduits for the C'tan's insidious power. Their ceramite armor was discolored, often taking on a sickly, metallic sheen, and in some cases, shifting with faint, internal light, as if living metal pulsed beneath the surface. Their weapon systems, enhanced by the latent energies of the captive shards, discharged bolts of cold energy or blasts of thermal power that seemed to drain the very warmth from their targets. The pilots, trapped within their machines, became extensions of the fragment's hunger. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, their voices flat and devoid of emotion over the Vox caster. Their faces, when seen outside their cockpits, were gaunt, their eyes holding a chilling, distant gleam, their skin often pale and translucent. They rarely spoke of Aethelgard anymore, their memories of its verdant beauty fading under the constant psychic pressure of the C'tan. Their purpose was now simply the great work, the assembly of the God engine. They were becoming living metal themselves, their humanity slowly consumed, their souls offered up as fuel for the ancient entities they sought to master. Sir Kalen, the Scion Primus, was the most profoundly changed. His eyes, once vibrant, were now like chips of obsidian, reflecting no light, only a cold, alien resolve. His speech was clipped, his commands absolute, his strategies devoid of empathy. He saw his remaining knights not as brothers in arms, but as expendable assets, their lives insignificant in the face of their ultimate goal. The Hezi Ethelgard's heart pulsed with an almost visible aura of cold power, its movements precise, lethal, and utterly devoid of mercy. He had fully embraced the indifference of the Catan, believing it to be the necessary mindset for ultimate vengeance. Lady Lyra was a ghost amongst them, a living anachronism clinging to a forgotten past. She meticulously plotted their course, guided them to the fragments, for she knew that to cease their hunt now would only delay the inevitable, allowing the Catan to simply slumber and wait for a later, more catastrophic awakening. Her hope, a thin thread of despair, was to understand enough to find a flaw, a weakness, a way to contain or destroy the assembled entity before it could fully awaken. She saw the price they paid, the long, slow death of their humanity, and it terrified her more than any external foe. One such campaign, on the desolate moon of Phobos 5, brought them face to face with an ancient Necron overlord. The fragment, a massive, crystalline structure resembling a shattered eye, lay embedded in the moon's core. The overlord, a being of immense power and ancient malice, fought to protect it, unleashing legions of warriors and terrifying constructs. The battle lasted for cycles. Knights were lost, their mighty machines reduced to slag and scattered debris. Necron forces were annihilated, only to reassemble and return with relentless patience. The very ground of Phobos trembled under the strain, its atmosphere turning to a corrosive haze. House Tenebris fought not with valor, but with a cold, desperate pragmatism, trading lives for progress, limb for fragment. When the crystalline eye was finally prized free and brought aboard the Viridian Tyr, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ship groaned, its bulkheads shuddering under immense strain. The hum of the coalescing Catan shards intensified into a high-pitched, almost unbearable whine. Lights flickered and died, grav plates failed, and the very fabric of reality seemed to stretch and tear around the containment chambers. The ship's few remaining astropaths screamed, their minds fracturing under the cosmic pressure, some simply turning to dust, their psyches consumed. The pilots in their nights felt an agonizing surge of power, a complete melding with their machines. They felt the cold void of space, the hunger of the shards, the slow death of stars. Their last vestiges of humanity seemed to burn away in this crucible of power, replaced by the chilling indifference of the Catan. They were no longer pilots of knights, They were extensions of the God Engine's will. Sir Kalin stood before the containment chambers, the crystalline eye pulsing with cold light, the Nexus core thrumming violently beside it. His face was devoid of emotion, his eyes fixed on the growing horror. "Almost," he whispered, his voice dry and raspy, barely human. "Almost complete. Ethelgard, we are coming." The long war had taken its toll, consuming House Tenebris from the inside out. They had gathered the fragments, paid the price in blood and soul, and were now irrevocably bound to the cosmic horror they sought to unleash. The stage was set for the final, terrifying act of their vengeance, a vengeance that would consume not only their enemy, but the Avengers themselves, and potentially a significant portion of the galaxy. In the twisted, cold reality of House Tenebris, the concept of a hero had long since been incinerated on the altar of vengeance. Yet, one soul still clung to the fading embers of humanity, her personal journey a lonely, desperate struggle against the tide of cosmic nihilism. That soul belonged to Lady Lyra. Her transformation was not one of corruption, but of profound isolation. As her brother, Sir Kalin, and her fellow knights embraced the Cataan's insidious influence, Lyra resisted with every fiber of her being. She felt the same cold hum, the same whispers of cosmic hunger, the same intoxicating surge of power from the coalescing shards. But she fought against it, clinging to the phantom scent of Ethelgard's forests, to the memory of her mother's gentle hand, to the quiet laughter of her lost world. Her role in the Morning Fleet was critical, yet agonizing. She was the one who could best discern the Citan's energy signatures, the one who could track the faint echoes of dormant fragments across the galaxy. She was the unwilling shepherd leading her flock towards their own annihilation. Each new fragment she located, each victory she helped secure, was a fresh wound to her soul, a deeper descent into the abyss she so desperately tried to avoid. Her night, the Viridian Sentinel, became her sanctuary and her prison. Within its adamantium shell, she could sometimes shield herself from the pervasive, chilling hum of the fragments, even as she felt its latent power coursing through her machine. She maintained her night meticulously, not for war, but as a last tether to the traditions of Ethelgard, a silent act of defiance against the creeping corruption. Its heraldry, unlike the faded and warped iconography of the other knights, remained as close to the original blossoming tree as she could manage, a defiant splash of emerald against the gray of their grim reality. Lyra's inner torment was constant. She witnessed the slow, agonizing death of her brother's humanity, seeing the noble protector of Ethelgard replaced by a calculating fanatic. She saw the glazed, distant eyes of her comrades, their once vibrant personalities dulled into expressions of ruthless efficiency. She watched as young pilots, barely grown, became instruments of brutality, their innocence devoured by the C'tan's ambient malevolence. Her attempts to reason with Kaelin grew less frequent and more desperate. She pleaded, she presented unassailable evidence of the C'tan's true nature. She invoked the memory of their mother, of Ethelgard itself. Each time, she was met with Kaelin's cold, unwavering gaze, his arguments now a chilling mimicry of the C'tan's own indifference. Necessity, evolution, the great work. He no longer saw her as his sister, but as an obstacle, a weak link in their chain of vengeance. The climax of her internal struggle came after the acquisition of the crystalline eye fragment from Phobos 5. The sheer power radiating from the coalescing shards in the Viridian tear was almost unbearable. Lyra felt her own mind being pressed, subtly reshaped by the C'tan's collective hunger. She spent cycles locked in her cockpit, shivering despite the warmth of her environmental controls, battling the insidious influence that sought to strip away her will, her memories, her very self. It was during one such battle of wills that a faint, desperate image pierced the overwhelming static of the C'tan's hum. It was a fleeting vision of Ethelgard, not as it was in its emerald glory, but as it was in its final moments. A gray, crystalline husk, silently consumed, utterly devoid of life or hope. And then, a memory, her mother's voice, soft and clear. The truest strength, my child, is not in the power you wield, but in the heart you protect. In that moment, Lyra understood. Their vengeance, fueled by the C'tan, was not honoring Ethelgard. It was desecrating its memory. To unleash a fully reassembled C'tan, even in the name of retribution, would be to inflict upon the galaxy the very horror that had befallen their world, only on an unimaginable scale. Their quest had become a cosmic atrocity, a betrayal of everything Ethelgard had stood for. Her path, once clouded by grief and a desperate sense of duty, became terrifyingly clear. She could not stop Kaelin with words. She could not turn House Tenebris back. The corruption was too deep, the obsession too absolute. She was the last fragment of Ethelgard's true legacy, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, what she had to do. Her burden was immense: to betray her brother, to turn against her house, to sacrifice herself for a galaxy that had forgotten Ethelgard. But the alternative, the unleashing of a fully reassembled star god, was a price she could not let the universe pay. Her personal journey had begun in grief, transformed into unwilling complicity, and now, finally, culminated in a horrifying, solitary resolve. She would still guide them, still lead them to the final fragments, but her purpose had irrevocably shifted. She would bring them to the precipice of their self-inflicted doom, but she would also, somehow, ensure that the nascent God engine of oblivion would never fully awaken. Her sacrifice would be the final, tragic act of a true hero, one forgotten and unmourned, but one who would, in the end, save countless worlds from the silent hunger. The final fragment. Lady Lyra's augur arrays, now exquisitely sensitive to the Citan's unique energy signature, screamed with a resonant certainty. It was located deep within a shattered, dead world known only as the Choking Maw, a designation given by early imperial explorers who had found its atmosphere corrosive and its surface perpetually wreathed in toxic, swirling vapors. A fitting grave for a galaxy's last hope. This was no asteroid or minor moon. The Choking Maw was the last remnant of a gas giant, its core consumed by a cataclysm of unimaginable antiquity, leaving behind a sphere of super-dense, petrified hydrogen and exotic minerals. And at its very heart, radiating a palpable field of ancient malevolence, lay the largest, most significant Citan fragment yet. The final piece to complete the entity that House Tenebris so desperately sought. Sir Kalen, his face a gaunt, skeletal mask, surveyed the data, his obsidian eyes gleaming with a terrifying triumph. "The Choking Maw," he rasped, his voice raw, barely human anymore. "A fitting crucible for the god engine of oblivion. Prepare the fleet. This is our final harvest." The journey to the Choking Maw was harrowing. The nebula surrounding the dead world was a vortex of gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic storms, a natural defense against intrusion. The morning fleet, already battered and strained, pushed through it, engines screaming, void shields flickering, each vessel a ghost ship, guided by the singular, unwavering obsession of its crew. As they drew closer, the combined psychic hum of the Citan fragments within the Viridian tier intensified to an almost physical pressure, a silent scream of cosmic hunger that vibrated through every deck. Lights flickered erratically, grav plates threatened to fail, and the air grew thick with the cold, metallic tang of raw energy. The night pilots, infused with the shard's power, felt an agonizing pull. a sense of their individuality dissolving into a greater, unfeeling consciousness. The choking maw itself was a nightmare. Its surface was a jagged landscape of crystalline spikes and obsidian chasms, perpetually cloaked in swirling, corrosive mists. The atmosphere was a toxic brew of heavy metals and exotic gases, impenetrable to conventional sensors. This was a truly desolate, forgotten corner of the galaxy, the perfect stage for an unthinkable act. The final battle, however, would not be against Necron legions or Imperial cultists. It would be against the environment itself, against the dead world's savage embrace. Kalen's plan was simple and brutally direct. Deep-bore drills, augmented by the Citan's energies, would cut directly to the core, and his knights would secure the fragment, whatever the cost. The knights descended into the corrosive maw of the planet, their external sensors immediately blinded by the swirling mists. They relied on internal auspex and the pervasive psychic resonance of the Citan to navigate the treacherous landscape. Jagged crystal formations, sharper than ceramite blades, tore at their shields. Subterranean tremors, unleashed by the dying world's instability, threatened to crush them. The corrosive atmosphere slowly ate away at their armor, even the adamantium proving not wholly impervious to its unnatural bite. Lyra, in the Viridian Sentinel, fought with a cold, desperate resolve. She felt the insidious pull of the coalescing fragments, the seductive promise of ultimate power. Her mind reeled with visions of Aethelgard's final moments, intertwined with terrifying glimpses of a galaxy utterly consumed, its stars winking out one by one. She knew that this was it, the point of no return. Sir Kalen, his knight. Aethelgard's heart, radiating an almost visible aura of cold power, led the charge. He was an extension of the Citan's will now, his movements devoid of hesitation or doubt. His chainsword, glowing with a faint, internal light, tore through rock and crystal with effortless ease. He pushed his knights harder than ever before, driving them through geological hazards and crushing pressures towards the final prize. Several knights were lost in the descent. One, the Aethelgard's pride, was crushed by a sudden fault line collapse, its pilot's last scream abruptly cut short as his machine was swallowed by the planet. Another, the Silent Scythe, succumbed to atmospheric corrosion, its systems failing, its pilot slowly dissolving within his own cockpit. The survivors pressed on, numb to the losses, their minds focused solely on the great work. Finally, after an agonizing, brutal descent, they reached the core. It was a cavern of impossible dimensions, its walls pulsating with raw, unbound energy. And at its very center, floating in a field of pure gravitational force, was the final Cetan fragment. It was truly colossal. A monumental, crystalline entity shaped like a vast, skeletal skull, its empty eye sockets radiating a profound, ancient emptiness. It pulsed with a rhythmic, thunderous thrum, a silent roar that threatened to tear reality apart. This was the shard of the endless hunger, the very entity that had consumed Ethelgard. Its presence was overwhelming, crushing, utterly inimical to life. It was not merely powerful, it was the embodiment of cosmic oblivion. As the knights began the laborious process of extracting the skull shard, a terrifying transformation began within the Viridian tier in orbit. The Nexus core, brought to full power by the proximity of the final fragment, flared with blinding light. The containment chambers holding the other Cetan fragments shattered. The individual shards, now resonating with the skull shard in the planet's core, began to move, to writhe, to coalesce. They were drawn together, pulled by an irresistible force, merging into a single, terrifying mass of living metal and raw starlight. On the choking maw, Kaelin felt a surge of ecstatic triumph, mingled with a horrifying awareness. The fragment beneath him thrummed with the familiar yet amplified energy of the C'tan. He felt his own consciousness dissolving, his sense of self eroding, replaced by an ancient, boundless hunger. He was not controlling the C'tan. He was becoming one with it. "Ethelgard!" he screamed over the Vox, his voice a distorted, metallic shriek. "Ethelgard is avenged." But it was not vengeance. It was the moment of their ultimate undoing. The nascent god engine of oblivion was stirring, its consciousness slowly, horrifically reforming. The greatest horror of House Tenebris's desperate quest was not the loss of their world, but the horrifying realization that their vengeance had merely brought their destroyer back to life, larger, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous than before. And they, its unwitting servants, were about to become its first meal. The ritual's climax on the choking maw was a spectacle of raw, unbound cosmic power. As the skull-shaped Cetan fragment was grappled by the knights deep within the dead world's core, an unstoppable chain reaction was unleashed within the Viridian tear in orbit. The Nexus core flared, its geometric surfaces humming with impossible energies, binding the scattered shards. The containment chambers, designed to merely hold dormant fragments, buckled and shattered, utterly overwhelmed. The individual Citan fragments, drawn by the irresistible pull of the Nexus core and the monstrous skull shard, began to merge. They writhed and flowed, liquid shadow and living metal coalescing into a single, terrifying mass. It was not a slow, graceful transformation, but a violent, agonizing birth. The air within the Viridian tear became superheated, then plunged to absolute zero. Gravity flickered, and reality itself seemed to stretch and tear at the seams around the nascent entity. The hum, once a pervasive whisper, escalated into a deafening, reality-rending scream that existed beyond sound. A cosmic shriek of awakening hunger. The night pilots on the choking maw, already profoundly corrupted, felt their minds dissolve entirely. Their last vestiges of humanity were burned away by the surge of Citan energy. Sir Kalen, his night now glowing with an unholy internal light, felt his consciousness meld completely with the skull shard. His vengeance, his grief, his identity, all were consumed, replaced by a boundless, ancient hunger, an unfeeling awareness of cosmic power. He was no longer Sir Kalen. He was a conduit, a vestige, part of the monstrous rebirth of the Citan. But as the God engine of oblivion began to stir, its nascent consciousness screaming into existence, the net that Inquisitor Valerius had so meticulously woven began to tighten. His fleet, a shadowy contingent of Imperial Navy vessels and Ordo Xenos frigates, had been lying in wait on the periphery of the nebula, cloaked and silent. Their objective, to destroy House Tenebris and prevent the Citan's awakening, whatever the cost. Valerius, his augmented eye gleaming, watched the energy readings from the choking maw climb to impossible levels. "Now," he barked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Launch the Grey Knights. Operation Final Requiem is a go." From the depths of his flagship, the Lance of Justice, a squadron of Grey Knight strike cruisers, previously cloaked by potent psychic wards and void distortion fields, surged forth. Their hulls, blessed and warded, shone with an inner light, their Geller fields shimmering like fractured rainbows against the cosmic horror. These were the demon hunters, the Emperor's most potent weapon against the unnatural, now unleashed against a threat that transcended even their vast experience. The Grey Knight vessels tore through the morning fleet like a storm. The scavenged ships, already compromised by the C'tan's influence, exploded in silent fireballs, their systems failing under concentrated fire and psychic barrages. The knights of House Tenebris, however, were not so easily subdued. Infused with the raw power of the coalescing Citan, they were faster, stronger, and more resilient. They engaged the Grey Knight Terminators in brutal close-quarters combat, their corrupted chainswords clashing against Nemesis force weapons, their thermal lances spitting cold death against power armor. Lyra, however, had made her final, desperate choice. While Kaelin and the other knights were consumed by the Citan's power and the battle with the Grey Knights, she enacted a contingency she had meticulously planned. Her knight, the Viridian Sentinel, its systems now barely functioning, was still responsive to her will. Her mind, though battered by the C'tan's presence, still clung fiercely to her identity. She steered her machine not towards the enemy, but deeper into the planet's core, towards the central cavity where the skull shard still pulsed, radiating its monstrous energy. She had spent weeks studying the Nexus core, understanding its intricate mechanisms, not for assembly, but for destruction. The core, designed to bind and coalesce Citan fragments, was also their greatest weakness, a focal point, a single point of failure. If she could overload it, disrupt its binding protocols, it would not merely stop the Citan. It would reverse the process, violently shattering the nascent entity. As Grey Knight Terminators teleported into the core chamber, their storm bolters spitting righteous fury at the remaining corrupted knights, Lyra made her move. "For Ethelgard," she whispered, her voice cracking, her tears mingling with sweat and blood within her helm. The Viridian Sentinel plunged its colossal chainsword, glowing with a desperate surge of its own internal power, directly into the Nexus core. The feedback was instantaneous and catastrophic. Psionic static screamed through Lyra's mind, incinerating neural pathways, burning away her sanity. The Citan's collective hunger shrieked in protest, a cosmic roar of unmaking. The Nexus core, overloaded by the deliberate trauma, began to destabilize. Its geometric surfaces twisted, its pulsating light intensified to an unbearable degree, and then, with a soundless, internal implosion, it violently ruptured. The effects were immediate and devastating. The coalescing Citan in the Viridian tear screamed as its fragments were violently torn apart, flung across the void in a blinding explosion of raw, untethered energy that consumed the ship and everything within a kilometer radius. The energy shockwave tore through the remaining morning fleet, obliterating them in a silent, cosmic fire. On the choking maw, the skull shard, still grappling with the Ethelgard's heart, and the other corrupted knights, recoiled, The energy that had infused Kalen and his brethren reversed, tearing at their very beings. The Satan's consciousness shrieked, then imploded, its fragments violently ripping themselves apart. Sir Kalen, in the Ethelgard's heart, felt a fleeting, agonizing moment of clarity as the Satan's influence was violently purged. He saw Ethelgard, green and vibrant, then gray and dead. He saw Lyra, her face streaked with tears. And then he saw the ultimate horror, the monstrous reflection of the Catan in his own obsidian eyes. He understood, in that final, excruciating moment, the terrible mistake they had made, the cosmic horror they had courted. A scream tore from his throat, a primal sound of despair and regret, as his knight and the fragments of the Satan were consumed in a localized, contained cataclysm of pure anti-energy. Lyra, within the Viridian Sentinel, felt the universe tear itself apart around her. The Satan's final, silent scream was the last thing she heard, the last thing she felt, as her body disintegrated, vaporized by the sheer force of the Nexus Core's implosion and the subsequent anti-energy cascade. Her sacrifice was absolute, complete, and utterly silent. The cataclysm on the choking maw, though localized, was immense. The dead world fractured, its core rupturing, unleashing a torrent of exotic matter and raw energy that quickly dissipated into the void. The Grey Knights, witnessing the horrifying implosion, understood. Their mission was complete, the greater threat averted. The sacrifice of House Tenebris, or what was left of it, had contained the star god. Ethelgard was not avenged, but the galaxy, unknowingly, was spared. The aftermath was a chilling tableau of cosmic silence. Where the Morning Fleet had once orbited the choking maw, there was now only an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and exotic particles, slowly diffusing into the void. The Viridian Tear, the makeshift flagship that had carried the desperate hopes of House Tenebris and its horrifying cargo, was utterly annihilated, leaving not a trace. Its destruction and the violent disjunction of the coalescing Satan had been complete. On the surface of the choking maw, the devastation was even more profound. The core of the dead world had ruptured, creating a vast, shimmering chasm that slowly collapsed in on itself, swallowing the remnants of the Knights, the Nexus Core, and the fragments of the Catan. The corrosive mists that perpetually wreathed the planet's surface thickened, forming a perpetual shroud over the site of the cataclysm, as if the very world sought to hide the horror it had witnessed. Inquisitor Valerius, aboard the Lance of Justice, watched the unfolding events with his usual grim stoicism. His augmented eye processed the data streams, the complete annihilation of House Tenebris's forces, the dispersal of the Cetan fragments into subatomic particles, the containment of the energy burst. His mission, brutally executed, was a success. The galaxy was safe, for now. He gave the order for the Grey Knights to return. Their sacred mission accomplished. They did so without ceremony, their silver armor stained with cosmic dust and the lingering taint of Cetan energies. There was no glory in this victory, only the grim satisfaction of averting an even greater horror. They would return to their fortress monastery, their memories scoured, their vigilance eternal. Valerius then commanded his remaining Imperial Navy vessels to establish a perimeter around the choking maw. It would be designated an exterminatus minoris zone, quarantined and monitored for millennia. No vessel, Imperial or Xenos, would be permitted to approach. Any lingering energy signatures, however faint, would be immediately purged by cyclonic torpedoes or orbital bombardment. The secret of the C'tan and the horrific folly of House Tenebris would remain buried. For the Imperium at large, House Tenebris simply vanished. Their designation as renegades was quietly upgraded to excommunicate traitoris, their name struck from all official records. The few surviving Imperial commanders who had encountered the morning fleet were debriefed, their memories filtered, and, if necessary, purged of any mention of Cetan or living metal. The narrative would be simple. A rogue night house, driven to madness by the loss of their world, turned pirate and was ultimately destroyed by Imperial forces. The truth, too horrific to contemplate, was locked away in the deepest vaults of the Ordo Xenos. There were no survivors of House Tenebris. All who had embarked on the Viridian tear had perished, either in the implosion of the Cetan, in battle with the Grey Knights, or in the final, localized cataclysm on the choking maw. The children, raised in the shadow of cosmic vengeance, the few retainers, the desperate technicians, all were gone. The bloodline of Aethelgard was utterly extinguished. The fate of Sir Cailan was a tragic reflection of his terrible quest. In his final, fleeting moment of clarity, he had glimpsed the true horror of his actions, the monstrous reflection of the C'tan in his own eyes. His scream, a primal sound of despair, was the last flicker of his humanity before he was annihilated. He had sought vengeance, only to become a conduit for the very entity that had devoured his world, dying in a manner that mirrored Aethelgard's silent consumption. His sacrifice, far from avenging his home, merely provided the means for Lyra to avert a greater catastrophe. He died a villain, unknowingly enabling the salvation he had unwittingly threatened. And Lady Lyra? Her existence was erased from all records, her heroic, self-sacrificing act utterly forgotten. There would be no imperial honors, no monuments, no remembrance of the knight who had betrayed her brother and her house to save a galaxy that would never know her name. Her sacrifice, born of profound love for her lost world and a terrifying understanding of cosmic horror, was absorbed into the vast, indifferent maw of the Imperium's hidden wars. She died alone, in agony, her last thoughts likely a desperate prayer for Ethelgard, a world that now existed only as a whisper in her vanishing consciousness. The choking maw would become a silent sentinel, a tomb world not of necrons, but of desperate hopes and cosmic horror, shrouded in perpetual mist. The scattered fragments of the Catan, utterly dispersed, would never again coalesce into a threat. The galaxy continued, unaware of the near apocalypse it had skirted. Planets spun, stars burned, and the endless, grim darkness of the 41st millennium endured. House Tenebris was gone, their name cursed, their quest a monument to the folly of seeking vengeance against forces beyond mortal comprehension. Their legacy was not glory, but a terrifying warning, known only to a select few in the most shadowed corners of the Inquisition. The void where Ethelgard once spun was empty, save for the ghost of an atmosphere, slowly dispersing over millennia, a silent, cosmic monument to a world devoured. House Tenebris, the proud defenders of the green world, was no more. Their name, once a symbol of stoic protection, was now a forgotten curse, erased from imperial records, known only as a fleeting, misguided, renegade force that met its deserved end. No grand monuments would ever be raised to Sir Kalen. His name would not be whispered in tales of valor or sacrifice. He died as he had lived in his final, corrupted years, consumed by a singular obsession for vengeance, unwittingly becoming a tool for the very horror he sought to destroy. His legacy was that of a tragic fool, a proud warrior whose honor was twisted into fanaticism, leading his entire house to self-annihilation. In his final, agonizing moment of clarity, he understood the monstrous irony of his quest, but that understanding came too late, serving only to intensify his eternal torment. He was the embodiment of the grim dark truth. In the 41st millennium, even the noblest intentions can pave the road to galactic ruin. Lady Lyra's fate was far more poignant, her sacrifice a silent, unacknowledged act of heroism. she died a traitor in the eyes of her corrupted house, her name never to be spoken again, her memory scrubbed clean from imperial archives. Yet, in her final, desperate act, she had saved countless worlds, millions upon millions of innocent lives, from the unthinkable horror of a reawakened Satan. She had understood the true nature of their enemy, recognized the devastating folly of their quest, and possessed the courage to make the ultimate, solitary sacrifice. Her legacy was a quiet triumph, a flicker of true nobility in an age of cosmic despair. She was the unsung hero, the forgotten savior. Her act of defiance, a single brave candle extinguished against an endless night. The remnants of the Satan, shattered and dispersed by Lyra's sacrifice, would never again pose a coherent threat. The shard of the endless hunger which had devoured Ethelgard was unmade, its malevolent consciousness torn apart, its fragments scattered across the void in subatomic particles. The galaxy, unknowingly spared from a second war in heaven, continued its endless, grinding conflicts, oblivious to the cosmic apocalypse it had narrowly averted. The choking maw, the desolate, dead world where the final act of this tragedy unfolded, remained an enigma. Its surface, perpetually wreathed in toxic mists, became a silent tomb, a stark reminder of humanity's desperate ambition and the horrors it courted. Imperial quarantines would hold for millennia, preventing any from unearthing the terrible truths buried within its fractured core. For those few inquisitors and Grey Knights who knew the truth, it was a chilling lesson. The universe held entities of such unimaginable power and alienness that seeking to control them was an act of suicidal folly. House Tenebris, the lords of the green world, had sought to avenge their lost home. Instead, they became a tragic testament to the corrupting influence of unchecked grief and the seductive allure of forbidden power. Their tale was a stark reminder that in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, vengeance is often a road paved with the bones of the Avengers, and hope, when it appears, is but a fleeting illusion, easily consumed by the grim darkness. Their legacy was not one of glory or retribution, but of a slow, agonizing descent into madness, culminating in a cataclysm averted only by the ultimate sacrifice of the one who saw the truth. Ethelgard was lost, and its avengers followed, leaving behind only a void and a whispered warning against the stars.